The fight for control of the Senate is largely playing out upstate, but downstate members of the Democratic Conference are doing what they can to help out. That includes making some rather substantial campaign contributions. Still, with only a few days to go, the candidates need more than just cash. Joining me now from New York City to talk about the key races is Democratic Senate Campaign Committee Chairman Senator Mike Gianaris. Welcome back to Capitol tonight.
Thank you, Liz. Good to be back with you.
So what's your assessment? I mean, I assume that you're going to tell me it looks good and everything's great, and you're on the road to victory.
Well, look, we're in the eye of the storm right now. We've got 6 days to go till the election, and you're right. Everyone you're going to ask is going to tell you they're doing great, and we believe we're doing great, and our candidates are doing well. But the reality is these are going to be very close races. Every 2 years we end up in a situation where lawyers are battling over absentee counts, and I don't expect this year to be any different because all these races are looking like they're going to be very, very close. And so we're doing all we can in the last 6 days to make sure we get our candidates over the finish line.
Yeah, there's some really interesting stuff going on out there. Some of it is politically confusing. For example, just today, you had activist Bill Samuels, who at one time was the finance chair for the Senate Democrats, which means he used to raise money for you. He's certainly a critic of the governor's. Today says it'll be the governor's fault if the Democrats don't take back the majority. What's your response to that? Is the governor, in fact, doing enough?
Well, I'm not placing blame because I don't think we're going to lose. And so we could have the reverse argument of how much credit the governor and everybody else deserves for our success. The fact is the governor has endorsed most of our candidates in our very competitive, tough races. That's what we asked of him. The state party, as you know, has spent funds on our behalf and on behalf of our candidates. So he has been a partner in our efforts this year, and so I'm not sharing that criticism.
Well, for a couple, it's true that he has done endorsements. A number of them have been in person when he does his women's equality bus tours when he's going through the state. Some of them have come just on paper in the form of press releases. We have not yet seen his image used in ads. Will he be cutting any ads for your candidates? Will he be recording any robocalls in the final hours of the campaign?
Well, these are all things that the political teams are working out between the governor's folks and our folks. But I think no matter what he does, it seems like the narrative is such that people will not be happy with it. So we're pleased as the Senate Democrats. He's been helpful. He has been helpful with resources. He's been helpful with his endorsements. And we've got work to do over the next 6 days, so we're focusing on getting our candidates to where they need to be to have victory next Tuesday.
Well, okay, it's true. The thing is, the governor does some things that also make people raise their eyebrows. For example, he tells the Buffalo News that a mailer that has been sent out targeting a number of Republican candidates, including Mark Grisanti, who actually is running on the independents line because he lost the GOP primary. The governor called this ad, which it's a mailer, which depicts a domestic violence victim, a black eye. It's very graphic. He said it was disgusting. He hasn't issued an endorsement there. He hasn't endorsed Mark Penapinto. So I guess, will the Senate Democrats denounce those mailers? I mean, it's sent out by an ally of yours.
Yeah, as you point out, that was sent out by an independent expenditure, not something that the conference itself put out. But I could bring you a big stack of mail or show you a lot of TV ads that were just blatantly grotesque and full of lies that the Republicans have sent out. We're in that season right now, Liz. It happens every 2 years, so we can pick at one or the other. But I think the more important thing is to focus on what the message of that mailer was, which is that the Republicans have stood in the way of protections for women.
Senator.
And that's a fact. And so they could try and shift the conversation by waving a picture in the air that's on a piece of mail, but they're not answering the question of why they're inhibiting protections for women all across this state.
I agree with you that there are certainly ads and mailers out there that stretch the limits of the truth. I'm not going to say that they're outright lies because that's for you to do. I have not, however, seen anything other than this particular mailer, which is out in a number of districts, that has a graphic image of a battered woman and then subsequently accuses a candidate of not being interested in protecting that woman from her abuser. You're saying to me that you're okay with that? You're okay with that image?
What I'm saying to you, Liz, is that there are a lot of images on both sides. I'm not going to sit here and start picking through them one by one, but if you want to bring me back tomorrow, I'll come with a hefty amount of mail and TV ads that the Republicans have done that are equally as gross, if not worse. And so let's not allow them to distract from the real conversation, which is that the Republicans want to repeal a law that keeps guns from from people who have committed domestic violence. They are not allowing a passage of the Women's Equality Act, which would provide additional protections for women who are victims of domestic violence, and that's the message of that mailer you're talking about.
Well, but they did actually vote on 9 of the 10 Women's Equality Act provisions, and even the governor himself mentioned that when he defended Mark Grisanti. I mean, the one piece actually that's that everyone's at odds over is the abortion rights plank, and the fact is that there are Democrats who say if we can't get all of it, then we don't want any of it. I mean, which is equally culpable. Some Democrats argue. I have had Democrats sit around this table and tell me, well, why don't we just do the individual pieces and then don't let the enemy be the perfect of the good? The perfect
well,
be the enemy of the good. Pardon me.
You bring up an example of the lies that the Republicans are telling. They are attacking our candidates who are members of the Senate already on that exact ground.
True.
But the fact is that everyone they're attacking on that ground voted for each of those 9 individually as well. And so we're certainly not taking that position in the state Senate. When those bills came up, we voted for them. And yet they're portraying it otherwise to the public. And that's kind of what we're dealing with now in this political season.
We also have seen the Independent Democratic Conference, which ostensibly has agreed to rejoin the regular Democratic Conference, of which you are a member, spending some money in Democratic races. Now, and also using an environmental organization as a pass-through to get $150,000 to Mark Grisanti, who of course is a Republican who maybe is joining the IDC. I'm not really sure. Are you working in concert with the IDC at this point? Is this a joint effort?
Well, certainly not in the support of Mark Grisanti. We're supporting Mark Panepinto up in that district. But they have been supportive of our candidates. I know they were helpful to George Latimer and some others, and we certainly welcome opportunities to work together to elect good Democrats. And to the extent they're being helpful to our candidates, we appreciate that.
But is it a joint effort? It seems at this point that it's actually 2 separate tracks that happen to be in support of some of the same candidates, and in the case of Mark Grisanti, not in support of the same candidate.
Well, that's a question for them to answer. We know who our candidates are, and where they're being helpful to our candidates, we appreciate it.
What are you doing about getting out the vote? I mean, there is, of course, a concern that the turnout will be very low, and that makes these races difficult to predict. I mean, we've seen polls that seem to indicate, and you and I have spoken about them, that the Democratic candidates in some of these key races are not doing well. And yet, of course, really the only poll, as you like to tell me, that matters is on Election Day. How are you turning out the vote?
We have actually, it's a good question, we've actually invested a great deal of our resources in an unprecedented field operation where people will be knocking on doors and reminding everyone that Election Day is coming to get out and vote. Because you're right, one of the big concerns in a year that's not a presidential election is that the turnout drops significantly. And we have a very ambitious plan on the streets to the tune of hundreds of thousands of dollars per campaign to make sure that that doesn't happen this year, and that people remember to vote, that they realize how important it is, especially when control of the Senate is at risk, and get them out to get those turnout numbers higher than they might otherwise be.
Are you concerned, do you share the concern that's been expressed by some of your colleagues, including, for example, Senator Liz Krueger, that the governor's push for the Women's Equality Party, which is just one letter off from the Working Families Party, WEP, WFP, could end up hurting the Democrats' effort to take back the Senate majority, because most of your candidates are not on the WEP line. They didn't manage to get on there. They are, however, on the WFP line, and the governor is not talking about the fact that he's a candidate on that line.
Well, I don't think so. I mean, the fact is, if someone comes out to vote on the women's equality line on Tuesday, they're going to be in the booth. They're going to vote for someone in those Senate races. And I think everyone at this point, after all the advertisements and mail and debates, is very much aware of who stands on the side of women in this election and who doesn't. And everyone knows that the Democratic candidates are the ones that do want to codify a 40-year-old law in this country, Roe v. Wade, and it's the Republicans that don't. It's the Democrats that want to pass a women's equality law in this state, and it's the Republicans who don't. And so if people go into the booth to vote on that line, I think they'll end up voting for our candidates anyway, so I'm not too concerned.
Are you disappointed, though, that the effort to petition some of your candidates on that line fell short?
Well, sure. We would like to be on as many lines as possible on the issues that we agree with and share. But it was an effort that began very late. It was conducted by some of our allies, not by us and our candidates directly, and it did come up a little short, as you pointed out. But I don't think it's going to end up affecting the results too dramatically one way or the other.
There is another independent line. It's Rob Astorino and his Republican allies line. It's the Stop Common Core line that I believe I read you might take legal action against. Are you moving forward with that?
We're considering our options at this point. We now have a documented case where someone said publicly that they sat in an office in Manhattan and signed all these petitions. That person is also signed not just for Joe Dillon, who's running against Senator Latimer, but also for Terrence Murphy, who was a candidate against Justin Wagner in the Hudson Valley. It raises a lot of questions. For example, what office was she sitting in? No one has answered these questions. And isn't it curious that the SRCC's, my counterpart, the Senate Republicans Campaign Committee staffer, was listed as a contact person on those petitions? So there's a lot of questions to be answered, and we haven't heard the answers to those yet.
Okay, well, we will wait and see. It is really sort of the height of the silly season. As you noted, Senator, things are getting a little crazy. But we will see you again perhaps on Election Day, if not sooner. I thank you so much for your time.
Thanks for having me back on, Liz.